Thermopylae, late summer, 480 BC. The coastal plain bakes under a Greek sun that has no mercy and no interest in what men decide to do beneath it. On one side, limestone cliffs rise straight and indifferent. On the other, the Malian Gulf sits flat and gray. Between them, a corridor of ground so narrow that two ox carts cannot pass each other without scraping. The Spartans know this place. They have studied its geometry the way other men study scripture. The pass is not a defensive position. The pass is a force multiplier. Bring enough discipline through a narrow enough throat, and numbers stop mattering. But this time, something is already in the pass. Parked in the throat of the hot gates, engine idling at low rumble, is a single M1 A2 Abrams main battle tank. Can 8,000 of the most conditioned soldiers in human history destroy one machine? Or does the machine end the Spartan legend before it even has a chance to begin? There are gaps in this thought experiment, and anyone with a degree in military history is going to find them. This is a 2 in the morning scenario, not a peer-reviewed simulation. But it is the version that kept me thinking longest, and here is why. The Spartan army at full deployment is not a collection of brave men. That framing undersells it badly. The Agog, the Spartan state education and conditioning system, takes boys at age 7 and does not return them as civilians. It returns them as something closer to a professional instrument. By the time a Spartan soldier stands in a battle line, he has spent more years training for close quarters formation combat than most ancient world adults spend alive in total. The phalanx they form is a wall of overlapping shields, each one roughly a meter across, each soldier carrying a spear around 8 feet long, with a short iron blade for when the lines collapse into each other. The formation does not depend on any individual. That is the entire point. It is a collective machine, and it has broken armies across the Greek world by simply refusing to stop moving forward. The terrain at Thermopylae narrows dramatically at its tightest point. Ancient estimates and modern archaeological surveys disagree on the exact width, but even the more generous figures place it somewhere between 30 and 100 meters, narrow enough that the Spartan phalanx could hold it with a fraction of the force any open field engagement would require. The geography makes their flanks invulnerable, negates enemy numbers, and forces every opponent into the same killing corridor. It is a brilliant tactical choice. It is also, in this scenario, a cage they are walking into voluntarily. The M1A2 Abrams weighs 73 tons, a fully equipped Spartan warrior in bronze armor, carrying shield, spear, and blade, weighs somewhere around 80 kilograms. The tank outweighs a single Spartan soldier by a factor of roughly 900 to 1. It is not larger than the warriors it faces, the way a bigger warrior is larger. It exists in a different category of physical reality. Its main armament is a 120mm smoothbore cannon with an effective engagement range against hard targets exceeding 3,000 meters. The entire Thermopylae plain, from cliff face to waterline at its widest, fits inside that engagement envelope with room left over. The tank can fire on targets it cannot see with the naked eye, guided by thermal imaging that renders heat signatures through smoke, dust, and the kind of morning haze that rolls off the Malian Gulf in late summer. Its secondary weapons are 2 machine guns, one firing half-inch rounds at a rate that empties a human formation the way wind empties a candle flame. The armor is composite layered construction, classified in its specifics, but confirmed in its results. It stops everything short of dedicated anti-armor munitions. A bronze spear tip against that hull is not a contest. It is not even a measurement. The crew of 4 operates in a sealed environment with communications, optics, and fire control systems that would take months to explain to someone from the 5th century BC, and none of those explanations would be useful. Here's the limitation worth tracking now, because it matters later. The M1A2 burns fuel at a rate of roughly 1 2/3 gallons per mile under normal operation. Its internal tank holds approximately 500 gallons. In a static engagement, idling and traversing, that number burns steadily, regardless of whether the main gun fires once or 40 times. And 40 times is roughly the total main gun ammunition load. There is no resupply. There is no fuel convoy. There is no maintenance crew behind a forward operating base. There is one tank, 4 people, and whatever they brought with them. The Spartan advance begins at dawn. The lead formation, the front rank veterans who have earned their position through 2 decades of training, enters the pass in the standard approach. Shields overlapping, spears leveled at the horizontal. The percussion of thousands of sandaled feet on stone sets a rhythm that generations of enemies have found deeply, physically unsettling before a single blow is struck. They have drilled this approach so many times that it requires no thought. The body executes it. The mind stays clear for the fight ahead. The tank crew detects them at 1,800 meters. On thermal, the Spartan phalanx is a dense, moving rectangle of heat signatures, packed close enough that individual figures blur into a single mass at this range. The gunner does not need precision. At 1,800 meters, against a formation narrow enough to hold the pass and dozens of ranks deep, the first round is fired at center mass. The front rank of the phalanx ceases to exist. Not breaks, not retreats, ceases. The detonation arrives as light before sound, a flash that the rear ranks see before they hear anything, and then the pressure wave hits them like a wall moving through air. Men in the second and third ranks go down not from fragments, but from the concussive force alone. The bronze shields they raised, the shields their fathers carried, and their fathers before them, do nothing. There is no meaningful relationship between a bronze shield and a 120 millimeter high explosive round. The concept of protection that the shield represents simply does not apply. On the Spartan side, the unit commanders are shouting before the echo finishes. Close the line, close the line. This is the trained response to losses in the front rank, and it is the correct response to almost every threat they have ever faced or trained against. The men behind the fallen step forward and fill the gaps. The phalanx contracts and continues moving. It is an extraordinary display of collective discipline under conditions of genuine shock. The tank fires again. The second round hits further back in the formation. The effect is the same. The third round, the crew switches to the coaxial machine gun as the formation's edges attempt to compress toward the cliff wall. The half-inch rounds do not require the same geometry as the cannon. They sweep. The Spartan commanders are watching their front ranks dissolve against an enemy they cannot close with, cannot see clearly, and cannot interpret using any framework their civilization has ever developed. There is no god in their cosmology who fights this way. There is no story they have been told that explains a weapon with no arc, no visible projectile, no thrower. Imagine you are a Spartan officer in the middle ranks. You have trained for 30 years. You have seen men die. You are not afraid of death in any conventional sense. But what you are watching ahead of you has no name. The men are simply gone, and the air where they were standing is wrong, and the sound comes from everywhere and nowhere. And your shield, the thing that has saved your life before, and the lives of the men beside you, is vibrating in your hands from concussions you cannot locate. You do not break. You are Spartan. But you are also watching a problem that none of your training addresses, and some part of your mind, the part that cannot be disciplined away entirely, is registering that the problem is not solvable with the tools you have. A unit of roughly 150 men uses a terrain fold near the cliff base to advance under partial concealment. They reach within 200 meters of the hull. Several reach within arm's length. Spear tips strike the armor plating and the tips shatter. One warrior drives his blade into the seam of a vision port with everything he has. The blade does not penetrate. Nothing happens. The men are engaged by the close-in machine gun at a range that requires no targeting calculation, but those men reach the tank. That detail will matter later. But here is where it gets complicated, and this is the part the pure power fantasy version of this scenario always skips. The tank is winning every engagement. It will continue winning every engagement it can power and arm. That is not in question. The question is how long it can power and arm them. At idle and combat traverse burn rates, 500 gallons of fuel does not last indefinitely. Not a week. Not even several days of sustained operation. Every hour the engine runs, the clock shortens. Every main gun round expended is gone permanently. The mathematics of a closed system with no resupply are not complicated. They are just slow, and slow does not feel like a limitation until it is. The Spartans have no fuel. They have no ammunition supply to exhaust. They have food they carried, water from the springs at the pass, and a civilization-level commitment to not leaving. Their entire strategic doctrine is built around enduring things that should not be endurable. They are, structurally, the one ancient force best suited to the one strategy that actually works against a tank, with no logistics chain. Wait, the machine that nothing in their world can damage will eventually go quiet on its own. When it does, the crew of 4 people is inside an inert iron box, surrounded by however many thousands of Spartan soldiers are still standing. The tank wins every battle. It loses the campaign by running out of time. The Spartans who survive carry the story home, not the story of a defeat, which is a concept Spartan culture handles by not using the word for it, but the story of a thing they encountered, a trial they were given, and a measurement they took of themselves against it. They describe the sound first, always the sound. A grinding mechanical growl that became thunder without clouds, without lightning, without warning. They describe the way it did not move like an animal moves. No lungs, no hesitation, no response to pain. Officers call it a construction, something made rather than born. Priests call it a test administered by Ares directly, not through mortal hands. The men who reached the hull and struck it before they died are given specific honors. Not because the strikes accomplished anything, because they were made. In Sparta, attempting the impossible thing with full commitment is the point of the exercise. The outcome is secondary. In the decades after, when Spartan men tell their sons what they faced in the past, they do not frame it as a loss or a legend of supernatural terror. They frame it as a measurement. They went into a narrow place against something that had no name in any language, and they found out what they were made of. The machine went quiet eventually, as all made things do. But the men who walked toward it when every instinct and every piece of evidence said not to, those men did not go quiet. A broken spear blade wedged into the seam of an iron door. That is the detail the story keeps. Not a wound, not even a mark. Just proof that someone stood close enough to try.